Really excited to have this next guest on the podcast from the great group Poco. This is Rusty Young. He's an awesome steel guitar player. He plays a multitude of different instruments. We hear some great stories about Poco and how they got started up until now. Some really funny stories in there as well. Really enjoyed this conversation a lot. One of my great all-time favorite groups, Poco. Don't forget, if you're listening on iTunes or if you're listening on Spotify, any of those great platforms, make sure you give us a 5-star rating. We really would appreciate that. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. You can see all the upcoming episodes. Also, don't forget to thank our sponsors as well, from Morning Buzz Coffee, company based out of Hamilton, Ontario. You can find their great coffee online, morningbuzzcoffee.buzz, owned by a couple of great musicians, great fellows, and make sure you support them. Also, Music City, Canada, based out of London, Ontario, and they have some awesome equipment there you can buy. They have everything you can ever imagine. They'll ship right to you, musiccitycanada.com. Also, Stickman Clothing Company, based out of Regina, Saskatchewan. Awesome clothing wear, and they'll ship to you as well. And they're owned by musicians and great friends, and they have some really cool stuff. So Stickman Clothing Company, check that out. All right, this is Rusty Young. Awesome conversation from the supergroup Poco. All right, we are here with Rusty Young. It's really nice to have you here on the podcast. I'm a big fan, and you're in Missouri now. How are things in Missouri?
Well, somebody has to live here, so I drew the short stick. It's okay. We have a beautiful place, and we're out of civilization here. We're in a cabin in the Mark Twain National Forest. So that part of it's really great because, being a traveling, touring musician can be really hectic. You're in crowds all the time, and, people tugging at your sleeve all the time.
Yeah.
So when we get off the road, we can come back here. I'm about 2 hours or so southwest of St. Louis.
Okay.
So we get off the road and we need to chill out. This is like the perfect place to do it. There,
yeah.
No neighbors, no anything. The only bad part is there's no civilization. The good part is there's no civilization, and then the bad part is that there's no civilization.
So would you be around Springfield? Would that be close? No.
No, we're. I don't know if you know I-44 that runs down the middle of Missouri.
Yeah.
Well, there's Cuba, there's Rolla, those little cities down there. We're about 20 minutes away from those.
Perfect. Okay.
20 minutes east.
It's nice to have a spot where you can go and just escape everything. It's nice to have.
Well, we try. We try. It's hard these days to escape things, but we do our best.
So how are you coping? I should say. Coping. That's a new word. I should actually publicize it. Coping during COVID. Yeah. Coping during COVID. How has that been for you with, not touring, I imagine, and not playing as much and all that? Has it been a different thing for you?
Not playing at all. We played, I think, maybe 2 or 3 shows in 2020 is all. Yeah. And we're not set to start again until June. And I'm hoping that happens. Missouri is really lame with a lot of stuff. One of them is getting vaccinated.
Oh, yeah.
It's just not available here. And I turn 75 next month. I mean, I'm in a good category to get the vaccine. Yeah. And it's just not here. It is not here. And so that's a little frustrating and worrisome because I do want to go out and play, and I can't do it if I don't have a vaccine shot. So that's once again part of the good and the bad of being here.
Yeah.
But it's been okay. Mary and I, at first we got a lot of things done around here because there's nothing else to do. And then about 6 months into it, we stopped doing that, and now everything looks just as bad as it did before we started fixing everything up. So, it's I'm going to be interested. I'm going to go to Nashville for about a week before we start and rehearse with the band because I haven't really sung in a year now, almost a year. And, it's the kind of thing that you have to keep doing in order to be good at it. And so I'm a little concerned about just, not playing for a year, my chops, remembering all those songs and all those parts and all those harmonies and then physically being up to the task. So, It's been hard because I didn't want to, at this point in my life, I didn't want it to be jerked out of it like we have been.
Yeah.
Like everybody has, all my musician friends have. And so that's been a tough pill to swallow, because I'm like sitting here now, there must be 30 guitars behind me on the walls and everywhere. And every time I come down here, this is where I hang out, I can hear them whispering, "You're not playing me."
I know.
So that part's tough.
Yeah, and actually playing in a band and just playing at home is two different things. And
way different.
Yeah. So, you're not going to sit at home and practice harmony parts, and it's just not as fun.
Yeah.
It's neat to, pick up an instrument and doodle around and play a bit, but it's not having the band together. That's a totally different thing.
It is a totally different thing. So I miss it. I'm anxious. It's funny because Mary and I, for the past few years, we'd be leaving to go to the airport, and she'd look at me and she'd say, "I don't want to go. I want to stay home." And now she's going, "I want to get out of here. Can we go back on the road?"
It's been interesting. I've talked to a few people on my latest podcasts, the last few, and it's a real mixed bag. I've had a few people say that they've enjoyed being at home so much that they're not too anxious to get back on the road again. And
wow.
Yeah. And from surprising people. And then you get the opposite, where you're just like, yeah, I just can't wait. But, I think some people have been on the road for so long that they never experienced that much time at home before. And some people
I haven't had, 2 months off since the 60s. And music's all I've ever done. It's been my whole life. I started playing professionally when I was 12, living in Colorado.
Yeah.
And it's all I've done. And I've done it a lot, and on a big scale and on a small scale. And it's so much part of life for me. It's like breathing. Yeah. And for it to be taken away is nuts. I don't relish not going out. I don't relish staying home. I'm going to be like Willie Nelson, I think, and I'm going to play until I fall down.
True.
Because I really enjoy it. And as long as the audience enjoys it, as long as folks want to come hear the band. Yeah,
exactly. One question I want to ask you right away, because I had sent a promo picture of you, and you're leaning over a gorgeous showbud steel. Tell me about that showbud. It's beautiful.
That is probably the most valuable showbud or steel guitar on the planet. It was made for me by Schott. I was Showbud made all my guitars through the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And I was good friends with David, his son, and Schott, and would go to the factory every time I was in town. And so when Legend hit and was such a huge success, he said, "I'm going to make you a guitar." He made all my guitars. "I'm going to make you a guitar, a very special guitar." And so he made this just beautiful showbud with the horse logo in mother of pearl on the front and a ruby eye.
Wow.
And David told me that it was the very last showbud that Schott worked on himself.
Wow.
And he gave me that, and I needless to say, haven't taken it on the road. I think I've played it 2 or 3 times in the studio. And it went to the Country Music Hall of Fame. It was there for 10 or 15 years, and now I've got it back. And it's just a really, really special guitar.
How's it sound?
It sounds great. Those little pickups are really, really, really neat.
Yeah. What's your go-to steel now? What do you play or take on the road?
I take a Carter. It's a single neck Carter.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
nice and light.
For nice and light. Exactly. It's under 50 pounds and in the case, and it's held up really amazingly well, getting beaten up by the airport. The airports have actually destroyed 2 cases that it's been in, but the guitars has made it. And I love the sound of it. It plays great. I have 2 or 3 Carters, the double necks and then that single neck.
Yeah.
And I like it a lot. I think I like the way it plays. And other guys I know, like the guy in Pure Prairie League. Oh, why am I not thinking of his name? John. Oh, well. Anyway, after he played with us for a few times, he went out and got one. And I know 3 or 4 other steel players who've gone out and got those. I mean, single necks are kind of what you're playing these days, because you hardly ever play the C6 tuning. I did in the old days, but then that was the old days.
Yeah, more
But,
Western swing or different type of stuff.
Well, no, I actually used it. That was my rock and roll tuning.
Yeah.
C6 tuning is what I did all those really heavy metal rock and roll runs on.
Yeah. But the Carters, I know, very popular with guys up here for flying because you can get them. I think they're under 50 pounds in a case. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. So
the name I was trying to think of their steel player is John Call.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
At my age, it takes a while for things to kick in your memory.
It's all right. I'm the worst with names. That's the worst thing. If you give me your phone number, I'll remember that forever. But names, no good.
Yeah, that's tough.
So let's go back. I know you started playing at a very young age in Colorado. What really got you into playing? Did anyone you know around you play, or is something you just kind of grew to like?
My grandparents were both musicians in Colorado. You know, my father is from Colorado. I'm from Colorado. And my grandfather played in big bands up in the 30s and the 20s during Prohibition.
Yeah.
The hotels up in the mountains were pretty isolated. And so they'd have these big parties where they'd have a room you could go to and get drink or other things, and then dancing downstairs with the band. And that's what my grandfather did. My grandmother was, she's a little redhead, and she played piano. And she played in the silent movies.
Oh,
she
wow.
would, they didn't give them music to play. They just said, play along to what you see.
Yeah.
And that's what she would do. Little tip jar on her piano. And I think she has a lot to do with the fact that I can write songs, because that's what she was doing. She was just making up songs all the time as she's watching.
Yeah.
And I think she passed that on to me because, I have the ability to do that too. Actually, I did a soundtrack. This is in the 70s when I did all my session stuff. It was a short video for a producer I knew in Hollywood. And he brought me in, and it's a shot of a rodeo, and I think it was called 8 Seconds. And it was this guy on a rodeo horse, bucking bronco, and he goes off, and he's doing fine, and it's in full speed. And then it goes into slow speed, and he starts to lose and fall. Anyway, the guy did the same thing. He said, just play what you feel as you're watching the video.
Yeah.
John Boylan, I think it was, who did it, the guy's name. And anyway, I did it, and later on I found out it won an Academy Award.
No way.
For him, for a short for him. But, that was really, I felt like exactly like my grandmother, but on a different level.
I wish.
But my parents didn't play music.
Yeah.
They say it skips a generation, and I think that's probably true. But my folks are big country music fans in Colorado in the 50s,
Yeah.
And they would, every Friday we'd go to the Alibi Inn, and they'd dance and listen to live music. And even when I was a baby, they'd prop me up on the bar and give me one of those pickled eggs and a Roy Rogers, which stunted my growth, by the way, until high school. And but my dad loved steel guitar. And so when I turned 6, they started steel guitar lessons for me.
Wow. That's not a typical thing to pick up at that age.
No. Well, times are really changed.
Yeah.
Back then, at least in Colorado, if you wanted to play guitar, it was all lumped into one category. There weren't pedal steels then.
Yeah.
There were only lap steels.
Lap steel, yeah.
And so when you took music lessons, the first lessons you took were in a room with like 20 other kids.
Yeah.
And you'd have your music stand and your little music that you were supposed to learn in front of you. And you would learn lap steel for like 6 months, and then they'd drop that, and you'd go to electric guitar, standard guitar.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it was because that way they could sell you 2 guitars instead of just one.
Yeah.
So, but I loved lap steel, and I was good at it right from the very beginning. I started playing in church. Every Sunday I would play, and which was the perfect background for playing now, because in a Baptist church, which we were, people aren't allowed to applaud or do anything. You play your song, it's dead quiet. You're finished, you get down and walk down the aisle, and it's dead quiet. So that's perfect for, the humiliation of being a musician later on in life.
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly gets used to playing out sometimes when you have that type of audience. It's like, I'm used to this.
Well, it happens to everybody. I was doing a show. We geared down at the end of the 70s, no, end of the 80s. No, well, I don't know, mid 80s. And anyway, Vince Gill is a friend of mine. And back then he was not a big star.
Yeah.
And he called up and I wasn't doing anything. He said, you want to come out and play steel with me for a couple of weeks, do this tour? And I said, sure. And one of the shows we did, we flew up to Canada.
Yeah.
And we played this big place, and it might have been Toronto. It was a big, huge country. It used to be a mall or something.
Oh, that's it used to be a mall. You might have played Lulu's. Was it called Lulu's?
I think that's it. That's it.
That's like 15 minutes from my house.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll never forget that because Vince, nobody knew Vince then. It was just, just getting kicked off or kicked off the label. So we flew up there and they had a band that opened and it was one of those stages in the round. And it was a big band with the horns and the girls that danced and, they did covers and all that kind of stuff. And the dance floor was packed. There must have been 2,000 people out there dancing. And then, they get finished and they're coming back for another set later. And the thing swings around and Vince starts off and he starts playing and the place clears. Absolutely clears. There were I swear to you, there were two couples left and they were both so drunk they probably couldn't find an exit. And that one of the guys started picking a fight with Vince. You suck! One of those deals. That was quite a place. I think they might have even had uniforms. It was really interesting.
Yeah, it was an old Kmart, store they'd converted into a bar. It had the world's longest bar, and it's no longer there. But it was a fabulous place to see entertainment. It was really great.
Oh, one thing is because I never go out, unless I absolutely have to. And then sometimes I go for drives or I go through drive-throughs. I do everything I can without getting out of the car. So I've been locked in this house for a year with me and Mary. And so when somebody calls me like this, I get carried away with talking. I'll tell stories forever because I've been locked in here with no contact with other humans for so long. So you have to pardon me.
So let's zip back, being a young guy, playing lap steel and learning guitar. What got you into your first band?
My music teacher, and I played in a band. He got me in a band called the Tip Toppers, and it was an all-girl band and me. And it was a family band, and they needed another musician, and he recommended me, so I joined him. And we just played at a bar in Colorado on Sundays, played for a few hours. And it was my first experience. And, I just played Sleepwalk, and I could play a few, guitar songs that were hits of the day. So that's what I did with that first band. Really, I think I was 12.
Wow. Yeah, those are good memories. I wish you could go back.
Yeah. Now, oh, yeah.
The cool thing about being a young person now is that you have an iPhone and you record everything. And there's certain times I go back when I started real young and I wish I had more footage of playing at these different events, when you're super young like that, because you got your memory of it, but there's not always a whole lot of video or there's some pictures usually, but
it's hardly ever.
Yeah.
Hardly ever.
So would you move on from there? Were you thinking at that point that music was going to be your thing, or did you have other interests?
I was pretty sure right from the beginning. Yeah. And so after I got up to 14, they could sneak me into bars. So then, and at that point, I actually had a Fender 1000, which were really hard to come by in Denver, Colorado. Oh. But I had that and a giant Showman amp, and I'm 14, and I was probably 5 foot tall. Yeah. So Dad carried my gear for me. But I got to play with the grown-ups because there weren't many steel players, pedal steel players. I think there were 2 in Denver, and I was pretty good by then. I lived steel guitar, from the time I was 8 on. My first pedal record, I remember the first time I heard a pedal steel was Buck Owens does Harlan Howard. I don't know if you've ever heard that record, but that's Ralph Mooney's, kind of my initiation into him. And he was a real basic pedal player. And so it's a great way to learn because there weren't any teachers. You had to learn by listening to other people. Yeah. And so I could play every note he played on that record. And I would stay up until 2 a.m. playing down in the basement, which is our music room. And, Alvino Ray, I don't know if you remember any of these guys.
Yeah.
Remember Alvino Ray?
Yeah.
He was the first guy to have that talking thing that Peter Frampton ended up, and Joe Walsh.
Yep.
He did that in the late 40s and 50s.
Did he really? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really something. And Speedy West and Jimmy Bryant were a big influence on me. And I have a great story about them if you want to hear it.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, we toured with Yes in the 70s, did extensive touring with Yes. And at those times, we'd book a whole level of a Holiday Inn, the whole, what do you call it, second story. And it would be both bands and the roadies and everybody all together. And so, and you'd have days off. And one day we had off, and I was walking down the hall, and you'd hear different things in different rooms. And a lot of people had their doors open during the day. And I'm walking down the hall, and I hear a Tennessee Ernie Ford record. I don't know if you remember him.
Oh, yeah.
He had a TV on the 50.
Yeah.
Sweet Pea, right?
Yeah.
I heard Tennessee Ernie Ford coming out of somebody's room. And I thought, what in the world? And Tennessee Ernie Ford used Speedy West and Jimmy Bryant. They were his section guys. They played on all his records, and they were an incredible team. And I'm walking by, I got to look and see who's playing this. I didn't think I knew anybody who had ever even heard of them. And so I looked in the door, and it was Steve Howe.
Wow.
The guitar player. Yeah. And I started talking to him. I said, wow, I'm just amazed that And he said, yeah, that he grew up on Speedy West and Jimmy Bryant. And that's what he was doing in Yes. And the next night when I was listening to him, it was exactly what he was playing guitar, exactly like Bryant and steel. He tried to play steel just like Speedy West. It was bringing Sweet Pea to Yes in the 70s. And I thought that was just, Tennessee Ernie Ford and Yes, what a great wild combination. So
I have to go back and listen to some of those records to hear that.
Oh
yeah,
you'll hear it.
That's fascinating. Yeah, you wouldn't think that's like a mile apart.
Oh, that's worlds apart. Yeah,
it's interesting when you run into certain people who you even country people who you think that all they listen to is country, but they'll it's like Alison Krauss loves heavy metal. You play one type of music, but they listen to something, a complete opposite. It's interesting how you get those wide ranges, but I mean, it's all great stuff. So I think, good music is good music.
Exactly.
Yeah. So moving on from being 14 and doing pedal steel and all that stuff,
playing with the big boys. How was that when you were young? Because I know I started out pretty young, and same as you, got thrown in with adult players when I was your age, and it's different. I mean, you don't always you fit in, but there's always a part of you. I always felt that you didn't fit in because you weren't an adult yet, right? You could play your parts, you fit in the band. But it really wasn't until I got in my 20s that I felt like, okay, now I really fit in. Did you feel that at all? No, they took me in and they tried to corrupt me in as many ways as they could possibly do it. and I was an eager participant. But, those were, you probably had the same experience. Those were, it's a good thing I was young because I was going to high school. High school. Even before that, but I was going to high school. So, you'd be in school from 8 to 3.
Yeah.
And then I would get a ride to, I taught guitar lessons and solo guitars at a place called Don Edwards Guitar City in Denver. And I would go there and I'd get there by 4. I'd give lessons and sell guitars. And then I'd have to get in the car, get picked up and go to the bar. And I was playing bars 8 nights a week. Because on Sundays we would play the regular, I think they had to close at 8. And then we'd go to an after hours place that started at 10 and went till 4.
Wow. And
I was doing that and going to high school, had those 3 things on my plate. So sometimes some of the help that the boys passed on to me was well received because just to stay awake through all that was really a challenge.
I bet. Were you doing any recording at that point?
Well, there wasn't much recording in Denver, especially back in those days. There were like home studios. There was one major studio, but back then, they only had 2-track and 4-track machines, and a lot of the country guys that I played with didn't have the money to hire a good studio anyway. So there wasn't a lot of recording in Denver until at one point after I'd heard the Beatles and all that kind of stuff, I got offered a job. One of the guys, George Grantham, who ended up our drummer, this guy came in and wanted to buy one pair of sticks, which was really odd. But he'd been in the store, and when we were not busy, we would jam. All of us would get together and jam, and he'd come in during one of those jams, went back and talked to his band, and then came in and used the excuse of buying one pair of sticks to ask me if I wanted to join their rock band. And their rock band was one of the 2 or 3 most popular in the Colorado area. Wow. And so I jumped at the chance because I was really into rock and roll and playing with guys my own age, and all my country friends just freaked. They said, you're making a horrible mistake. This rock and roll thing is not going to work out. And, you have a chance. Someday you'll be in Nashville playing steel, and you're going to give that up to play rock. So anyway, I ended up in a rock band, and that's when things really changed. And played with all the Byrds. We opened for the Byrds. We opened for Sonny and Cher. Wow. We opened for the Beach Boys. All these bands that would come through Denver, we were one of the opening acts that were always there. And I remember when we played at the Buffalo Springfield, they were our band's favorite band. Yeah. And most of the songs we played that were really good were Buffalo Springfield songs. And so they had us opening at a roller rink in Denver for them. And so we go on, and they weren't there. They're still at the hotel. They were the kind that didn't show up until time to play. So they're there playing, and we're looking around. So we started playing Buffalo Springfield songs. We played their whole catalog. The audience was so confused. We played their whole catalog before they got there, and they never saw it. They never knew. And then they get there and play the same songs. But Neil wasn't with them, needless to say, and neither was Bruce. Oh, yeah. And so they didn't sound a whole lot like the Springfield that was on record. Yeah. But that's the first time I met Richie Furay.
Wow. So different playing in a rock band. Were you mainly steel? Were you playing guitar as well, and lap, or what did you mostly play?
Yeah, I was playing both. I was playing guitar. If it was Chuck Berry, I'd play guitar or whatever. But we were doing, I could do, for example, Jimi Hendrix really well on that C6 tuning. Yeah. And so we played a lot like that. I actually am on record. The record's called Flower Power, I think they call it now. And it's one of the earliest rock records. I think it was 65 or 6. And the star of the movie was his first starring part, Jack Nicholson. Wow. And Flower Power, yeah. And so they wanted Jimi Hendrix, Purple Haze. They wanted him to play Purple Haze in their soundtrack. And in a fit of good taste, Jimmy turned them down. And so they came to us, the guy that produced our little local band that made records, mentioned us. So anyway, I flew out to Los Angeles and played Purple Haze backwards on pedal steel. So if you ever get that soundtrack, because you can still find it. Yeah. It's hilarious. It's, instead of boom, 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 it's back, boom, completely backwards all the way through. I got a kick out of it, and I don't think anyone else noticed. It's called Ash Wednesbury, very 60s title.
Another thing.
So look up. So that was the beginning. I mean, that was kind of like what I did in Poco. It was just an extension of that, except in Poco in the beginning, I didn't play guitar. I played, I would play steel guitar and dobro and banjo and stuff like that. Yeah.
So let's talk about getting that call and heading to Los Angeles to play, and how you kind of formed Poco. I know you've told the story a million times, but give us a short version of how that all happened.
Okay. Well, one of my best friends, and still my best friend forever since junior high school, Miles Thomas, he went out to LA along with a band they were called the Soul Survivors, and they went to LA, they called themselves the Poor. And one of the guys in the Poor was Randy Meisner. And, I loved Randy Meisner. When we were playing in local bands, his local band and us, we played festivals and stuff a lot together. And I just admired him. Always wanted to play with Randy. Yeah. So anyway, Randy and those guys, and Miles is their road manager, goes to LA. They break up. He ends up road managing or roadieing for the Buffalo Springfield. And so they're in the studio, and Richie has this song called Kind Woman. Jimmy's producing them, and they decide that, excuse me, they decide that they'd like a steel guitar. They think a steel guitar would be great on it. And so my friend Miles is there, and he says, hey, I know the best steel guitar player there is. Well, let's give him a call. And they agreed, probably because there wasn't, I think Sneaky Pete and Red Rhodes were the only guys in LA at the time. And so I got the call. I got the call from my friend Miles, and he said, come on out. You can stay at my house, and I got this session for you, and I got an audition for you too. And I said, like what? You can audition for the submarine. What do they call them? The submarine band. Graham Parsons band. It was a country band. It was playing like the Palomino out there. Yeah. They need a steel player, and so we'll set up this audition for the submarine band and this session. And so come on out. So I did. I came out. And flew out there, got to the studio, and it's the first time I'd ever been in a big time, Sunset Sound, big time studio, gold records on the walls. The Doors were recording down the hall, wow. And I got stories about that too, but I won't go there. It was really a big deal, and my favorite band, and I'm getting to play on their record and all this kind of stuff. And I opened up my case, and the steel guitar was completely broken. They had busted the pickups out of it. They were just dangling there. No. And so it was really heartbreaking, because here was my big moment in life, I felt, and I had no guitar. And, in 1967 in Los Angeles, you couldn't call a music store and order, say, can I rent a pedal steel? Yeah. And even if you did, you'd end up with what happened to me. Messina says, well, you know what? I think Stephen Stills has a pedal steel in the closet here. He wanted to learn to play, but never did. And it's just sitting here. So we broke it out, and it was, it's a pretty decent show bed. But the problem was, it was the Emmons setup, which I'm sure you know what that means. Yeah. It means the pedals are backwards to me, because I use a day setup. And so I ended up playing the most important record I've ever played on, trying to make sure I could not push the wrong pedals because they were backwards. It's like trying to play Purple Haze with your guitar behind your back. Oh, yeah. And but I came through it. Okay, and they really liked it. And the next day they said, the Springfield's broken up. We want to start a new band. Would you be interested? So that was the beginning. And then I called George Grantham. We rehearsed for like 6 months, and nothing happened. There were nobody really great. I thought, geez, they're going to know all these great musicians, fabulous. This is going to be incredible. Yeah. Nobody. And I was running out of money. I had sold my beloved Porsche, Corvette, and everything else I owned to stay out there for this project. Yeah. And so I was running out of money, and there was no band. So I said, I know a great drummer, and he sings high. I think you'd really like him. It was George, the drummer from my band in Colorado. Yeah. And so we got George out, and they loved George, and who wouldn't? And then we needed a bass player, and I knew Randy was there, and I knew his band had broken up, and I think he was doing odd jobs and stuff like that. So I ran over to Randy's house. Miles stayed in contact with all those guys, so I knew where he was. I ran over there, and I remember he was washing his Austin Healey bug eye. Those? Mm-hmm. The Austin Healey, those little tiny things with the bug eyes. Yeah. He was out in the front yard washing that, and I came over, and he had a flat top. He had cut all his hair off. He had a flat top because he thought he might end up going into the service. So anyway, I talked to him, and he was happy to come by and do a rehearsal. And we had a lot of guys rehearse. Timothy B was one of them. And I just, loved Randy so much that I pushed really hard for us to hire Randy. So it was my friend Randy and my friend George, Richie and Jimmy. So that was our band. Yeah. And it was a great band.
Obviously.
So yeah, it's what that's what the band that kicked off the whole country rock thing in LA.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, it wasn't there before that.
So struggling, obviously, running low on money. How did you fix that issue? How did you manage to make it work?
Actually, Neil Young fixed it for us, and I don't think he knows it to this day. But Neil's notorious for not showing up. I've experienced it in my lifetime. I've had a tour canceled because he wasn't having fun. Yeah. So Neil wouldn't show up, but he wouldn't tell anybody that he wasn't showing up. And so this guy, Dickie Davis, who ended up managing us in the beginning, he was their road manager. He would just he'd have an airline ticket for Neil, and he'd throw it in his glove compartment. And then, they'd go on and they'd try and find somebody else or play just without Neil. And they did that. He did that his entire career. He's done that his entire career. Yeah. And so we got kicked out of Richie's house rehearsing and kicked out of Jimmy's house. And it was really looking grim because there was no place we could rehearse and we had no money. I was living with friends and most of the guys were living with friends. And so I'm over at Dickie Davis's house or his apartment one afternoon. And he said, and I walk in on the table, there's all these airline tickets. There's like 100 airline tickets scattered on there. And I said, what's that? And Dickie says, well, those are the Neil Young tickets that we never got to use. And I said, you're kidding. And I opened up one and looked at it. And the ticket was made out to initial N Young. Yeah. Well, it just so happens my first name is Norman. So we gathered up all those tickets. And back in the old days, you could do this. We took them in and got our money back. No. And it was like thousands of dollars. And with that money, we could afford to go to SIR and rehearse. And that's how Neil got us into the Troubadour.
That's fabulous. You can't do that now.
No, you can't do that now. It was a different time.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's a great story. Yeah, good for Neil for not.
That's probably the last really sweet thing he's ever done in his life. He didn't even know it.
So when
I should talk nice about him because he's a Canadian, right?
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. That's all good. So what ended up being your first official gig with Poco? Do you remember?
I think I'm pretty sure it was Beverly Hills High. And it was in an auditorium it might have been for graduation. Yeah. And it was Three Dog Night, who had just released a record, and us. And we went from there to being the house band at the Troubadour. The Troubadour was a really important club back in the 60s and 70s, and where everybody wanted to play. And we had connections there. And so we had this deal where we gave them a good rate because they'd let us rehearse in the afternoons. Oh, yeah. And so we rehearsed there and then play at night. And then we became the house band and we would fill the place every night. And it's really fun because the celebrities would come out. They heard, the main writer for the LA Times, music writer, his name escapes me again now, said Poco was the next big thing. And so all of a sudden it was so hot. Everyone was coming, all the movie stars and that. And I remember like the first night looking down at the celebrity area, and there was Ricky Nelson, Ozzy, and David. Wow. And Ricky became a big fan. He came all the time. And that's one of the reasons Randy ended up, after Richie kicked him out of the band, he ended up playing with Ricky. Yeah. So, and you'd see Waylon Jennings, George Harrison, the list goes on of people who were coming by to see what was going on with us. Gene Clark, Doug Dillard, Chris Hillman, all those guys. The guys hanging out were in the bar that couldn't afford to come into the show were J.D. Souther and Glenn Fry and Jackson Brown. But they could get more girls in the bar, so they didn't really care, I don't think. Yeah. Actually, J.D. and Glenn had a record deal, and they ended up opening for Poco as a duo at the Troubadour for a while. Wow.
So what made you guys so popular, do you think? Was it a new sound? The band was that great? What do you think was the trick back then for for everyone coming to see you
I
all the
think
time?
I think it was both. I think it was both. Well, first people were interested in what Richie Furay was doing because he'd been the lead singer in the Buffalo Springfield,
Yeah.
and they did CSN. I don't think was out at the time. We were doing that before people had recorded. We couldn't record because we didn't have a recording contract. We had to try and get one. Other bands like the Byrds had recording contracts, so they could just come by, see the show, and go into the studio and repeat. And so I think, first of all, Richie's stature and plus Richie's talent, his voice is still one of my favorites of all time. I love his voice. Yeah. And then when you combine that with, can you imagine him and Randy Meisner? Oh, yeah. It was just magical. And then Jimmy playing that kind of guitar that James Burton made famous with Ricky Nelson. Yeah. That was the style he was playing, which was really a country rock style. Yeah. And then me, and that's when I started taking the steel and turning it over upside down and playing it with a chair. And, I would play it with a beer bottle and a music stand, just getting crazy at the end of the set for our last song. And I think people were kind of stunned by that because no one had ever seen a steel player do that. So we had all the elements. George was a great drummer. So all the elements were there. The songs were new and different. The sound was new and different. Yeah. And steel guitar, you have to remember, was not in rock bands then. Mm-hmm. When we did the first record, Picking Up the Pieces, Clive Davis was head of the label. And he called us in when we were in New York. And he said, I want to play you the single. I just mixed down your first single, Picking Up the Pieces for you. And he put it on in the reel-to-reel and he played it. Yeah. And it was the same. It was exactly the same, except he took all the steel guitar out. No. And Richie said to him, that's great, but there's no steel guitar on it anymore. And Clive Davis said, this is exactly what he said. You can't have a hit record with steel guitar on it. So that was kind of the although he's an idiot, the Everly Brothers, Lucille, Buddy Emmett played the solo on that. And there were lots of different, hit records with steel guitar on them, but he was a lawyer and he wasn't really a music person. But so that was the atmosphere there. So when I started doing crazy things, that was something that people hadn't expected, and only country bands had steel guitar. Yeah,
it's true. So what was making the first album? What was that experience like? Were you really prepared going in? Did you have everything, or was it kind of a work in progress when you got into the studio?
Well, we cut a deal you could never do again with CBS back then. We got unlimited access to the studio. So now we could go in, and it was virtually unlimited. Wow. And we could go in, instead of hiring a rehearsal hall and rehearsing our songs, we just go in the studio, and we'd spend a week rehearsing in the studio and then push go when we were where we wanted on that song. So that was really great, perfect for us. I was astounded because there was so much I didn't know about recording and even music. Jimmy would sit there, look up at the speakers, and he would hear things that I couldn't hear. There's a buzz there, or there's this there, or, this compressor is pushing too hard here. And, I had so much to learn. It was just, it was a pretty overwhelming experience.
That's an amazing deal. Just being able to go in whenever you wanted. How did that deal come about?
Really, I've never heard of it. I never heard again. They regretted it after about 2 albums. But I'd never heard of that either. We had a good lawyer. That's what happened.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So when did you first feel like Poco was getting some success outside of, being that band at the Troubadour and being this LA sensation? When did you feel like you started to really kind of spread out a bit?
Well, once the first album got out, and College Kids, it hit there big, and FM radio had just come out. Before that, it was only AM radio, which is mono and, really boring. Then FM radio came out, and they had a different format. AM was where the Eagles got played a lot, and FM was where Poco got played a lot. But AM sold records, so they made wise choices. So we got all this play on FM, which is what the college kids were listening to. And like on our second album, we had a 20-minute long, the whole side was one song. And that was perfect for FM DJs in 1970, because they could put that on and then go out in the hall or down the street or whatever, for 20 minutes and come back. Yeah. And so we got a lot of play. And a lot of bands actually were doing. I know Santana did it, and a lot of bands did that. So that's once we hit the college campuses. Then for the next through the early 70s into the middle, we played nothing but colleges. Like 6 nights a week, we were in every college in the country.
Yeah,
and that built into a following that we're still milking today. Those people are just really old now, but it's the same people coming to the show.
Yeah. What was touring like then? Were you doing some flying, or was you threw your stuff in your car and away you went, or how was touring like at the beginning when you're going through all those colleges?
Yeah, well, in the beginning, it was all station wagons, and we got a truck to haul the gear, and we had a couple of roadies, and they would drive to the gigs, and we'd all pile in a station wagon and drive from one show to the other.
So let's talk about your steel playing on Indian Summer. Awesome song and awesome steel playing on that song. Do you remember your approach when doing that song?
Oh, I always have the same approach with steel guitar. I look at it as country strings.
Yeah.
And I try and play it like a string section. And the one thing that I was taught by my peers in Colorado when I was growing up was that how important melody is. And the great players that I've known look down on the guys who go, I actually look down on them when they're doing that on mandolin. I just think that's so self-serving or whatever. It just doesn't get the point. Yeah. The most important thing is to have a strong melodic position on the instrument and on steel. And steel's perfect for that. If you just look at it as if you were charting a session on strings.
Yeah.
And but I also love to have different sounds on the steel and not have it sound just like one thing. So that's why I use that sitar bar, they call them, on that record. So that, it was not hard to play on that because Paul wrote such great songs and the chords were they flew, for pedal steel, they flew by so easily? Yeah, whatever that word is. It was easy. Yeah. And so the approach was the same as I do on all those songs. I have a sound I like on steel, and I like octaves, and that's one thing I've noticed a lot of guys don't do is, to have an octave, that bottom string, to have that going through all the padding, and it gives it a big full sound if you can get the whole thing. Oh, there goes the dog.
Yeah.
That's a hillbilly alarm.
Oh, there you go. That's what it is. Yeah.
So that's always my approach. I love the sound. In-law Magnolia was approached the same way, with that big sound, trying to make the steel sound real as big as it can.
Yeah.
So,
what were you using as an amp for your steel back then in those records? Where is it the same setup all the
Twins.
time? Twin, yeah.
Twins.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in the mid 70s. Actually, we started off with Twins, and then we on the big stages we went to dual Showmans, and I actually played steel through 2 dual Showmans.
Wow, that'd be loud.
And a Leslie that had been beefed up to twice the power of a normal Leslie.
Yeah.
And that was my amp setup. So I got to tell you another story, okay?
Yeah.
You can cut all this out.
No.
So we're playing, and the opening act was Golden Earring. You remember them?
Yeah, I remember that name. Yeah.
What was their big hit? They had a giant hit, something Love. Anyway, people will remember Golden Earring. And they had just come over from Holland, and they couldn't afford to bring roadies with them. And so they had to use American crews that had never worked with them. Radar Love.
Oh, yeah. Radar Love.
Remember that?
Yeah.
So anyway, we're set up on the back, and I've got my 2 dual Showmans and my big Leslie and this drum set. And then on the other side, Paul, I think, had a stack of Marshalls, and Tim had a big amps and Ampegs, I think. And so we're set up, and then right in front of us, with a little aisle in between, they set up for Golden Earring. And they put their amps, and they had, a bunch of stacks of Marshalls. And so the very end of their set, they'd play Money, that song, gotta give me money. And when it ended, the drummer would jump over the drum set down to the front, and they'd all take a bow. And at the same time, they fired off there was a giant cannon. I mean, it must have been 3 feet across that shot confetti and smoke and everything you could think of, everything but BBs. And there was a chain on it, and you had to pull the chain for the thing to fire, and he had to be right in time with the drummer jumping. So they got to their last song, and the drummer, they play the whole thing, and the drummer starts to jump, and the guy pulls the chain, and the cannon goes like this. Instead of shooting straight up in the air, it shot my amplifiers off the back of the stage.
No way.
And he's jumping over the drums, and he turns around to see what's going on, and he falls flat on his face at the front of the stage. That, by the way, was the last show we played with them. So
yeah.
But when I think of those big deluxe, they were a big target.
Oh no.
Over the years, it's always been Twins, and it's back to that because they're reliable. And nowadays, touring is different. You don't carry your amps with you. I don't know anybody who does, except the giant acts.
Yeah.
And so you can get a Twin anywhere, and they're usually pretty good, and they're reliable. So that's what I play through.
Are you in stereo with the Twins, or?
No, just one
Just
Twin.
one Twin. Yeah. Yeah.
But I have to use two channels because one's for the electric guitar and one's for the steel guitar. So I need two separate channels of EQ and volume and all that.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about when Crazy Love came out. From what I kind of heard and read about a little bit, that you didn't expect that song to be the hit it was. Kind of unexpected.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would have expected it. The story is, right before we were going to go into the studio and record, Timothy got a call from Don Henley, and he invited him, needless to say, to join the Eagles, and which we thought was a pretty good career move at the time. That's my third joke.
Yeah.
Anyway,
pretty good.
So Tim left. Yeah, we told Tim, come on, career move. You got to do it. And so then George, our drummer, decided he thought the band was going to break up. So he joined the Byrds and went off with them. And so it was just me and Paul Cotton. And, we thought about changing the name because his first name is also Norman. We were going to be two Normans instead of Poco. That's my fourth joke right there. So anyway, we're in the studio and we're rehearsing new bass players and drummers in the rehearsal studio, and management came down and we said, here's the new songs we're working on, and we played Heart of the Night and Crazy Love and I think Spellbound, and the management said, boy, that's really great. And the label calls and says, we're thinking we're going to drop the act. And so they invited the label down to the rehearsal hall and said, you should listen to these songs they want to record and then make up your mind. We played them Crazy Love, and they said, go make a record. So that song saved, the band would have ended in 78 if it weren't for that and that song. Wow. And that song was written in about 30 minutes at the most. It was just one of those that came to me all together.
Yeah.
And I thought it wasn't finished when I played it for the guys. I did the, ooh, crazy love, ah. I did that, and I said, don't worry, guys, I'll put words there. I'll take those parts out. They said, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. So
wow.
It went through a lot of, and then the label didn't want us to release it it was released in November. And the label fought against that really hard because they said, you can't break a record in November because all the radio stations are going to playing Christmas songs. Yeah. And so it's like the worst thing you could do. And for some reason we said, no, we really want to release it. I think it was mid-November. And I think what happened really was that everybody thought that. So nobody in the business released a record in November except us. Yeah. And so we got a lot of airplay. But everybody said that we had finally hit the song that was a hit. And, Timothy had written some great songs for the band that I thought were going to be hits. Yeah. Richie quit because Good Feeling to Know wasn't a hit. Paul wrote great songs. So, there were a lot of great songs floating out there. And I was surprised when it went to number one. And the Legend album sold 1 million copies.
Wow. So did you feel back at that time, obviously the Eagles were very successful and doing their thing, that was your competition, or
they had some great songs,
yeah,
really great songs. I remember being in the studio at RCA, and our engineer said, I was just driving in for the sessions, and I heard us guys on the radio, and I don't remember recording that song. It was called Take It Easy. No, that wasn't us. But I think if it weren't for the Eagles, Poco wouldn't have lasted, because we would sell a fair amount of records. We'd sell 300,000, maybe 350.
Yeah.
Enough for them to make money pretty much every time. And at that, you can pretty much keep making records. But the Eagles were selling 1 million records. And I think, I've always thought that because the Eagles were doing so well, the labels would stay with us because they thought maybe someday, there's so much like the Eagles. On our label, we can have an Eagles. So I think if they weren't there, we might not have been able to last as long as we have.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, actually. So back in that day, obviously Crazy Love came out. Were you doing a lot of headlining tours at that point? Were you doing a lot of supporting? What kind of touring was happening back then?
Before Crazy Love, it was, I think through the 70s, we were mostly headlining.
Yeah.
I think packages are more, packages is pretty much all we do these days.
Yeah. And
it's been that way for the past 20 years. But back then, it was, a lot of people wanted to come see the band, even without Richie, even without Tim. Thank God, Tim leaving was a big crushing blow to us. And, but with that hit, it got us through it. It got us through that, and the audience would still come, and even though Timothy wasn't there. And no, we were mostly, especially after Crazy Love, we headlined the Greek Theater and, all these big venues, Red Rocks in Colorado, yeah. Carnegie Hall, places like that. So it kicked us up a notch.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any good stories from the road? Good stories from the road. Well,
we played, I've been fortunate enough to play places I never dreamed I'd play, like the Hollywood Bowl. Yeah. We played there. We played Red Rocks. We played Shea Stadium, and the Peace Fest, or what it was called, Freedom Fest. Played a lot of really great places. I can't think of them all. Even around the world, I can't think of them all offhand. But, it was just a wild experience, a wild, great experience. We were playing in St. Louis, I remember, at the big hall here in St. Louis, and this was must have been mid-70s or earlier, 74. And we were opening for the James Gang.
Oh, yeah.
And that night we opened and did our thing, and we all stuck around to see Joe. And that night, Joe was just on fire. He was just amazing, absolutely great. And backstage, it's Joe, that was just great. And Richie Furay has always wanted to be a guitar player, but he's a folk singer. He plays good rhythm guitar, but he's not a real lead player. He can't improvise. Yeah. And so Richie says, boy, I'd give anything if I could play like that. And Joe looks at him and says, well, it's not that hard. And he says, just, I'll tell you what, in 20 minutes, I can teach you to play just like me. It's not, once you got the thing down, it's not hard. And, I had a background of being a guitar teacher for 10 years. And I thought, 20 minutes? I want to see this. So he says, I'm in room 232 or whatever. Come on down after the show and bring your guitar, 20 minutes, no problem. You'll be playing just like me. So we get back to the hotel, and I said, Richie, I got to go with you. I got to see this. So we go and knock on the door. Joe answers. And Joe's already in party mode,
Yeah.
And so it was the typical Holiday Inn, used to have those two twin beds, and they had all the green and gold, on them, and the floors were green. And so anyway, Richie and I sit down on one twin bed facing Joe, who's sitting on the other, close to the Jack Daniels. And Joe goes, okay, here we go. And he goes, and then he looks at Richie and he says, okay, now you do it. There was no way. And so I said, why don't you slow it down a little, Joe? Come on. So, it's just not that hard. And he does the same thing. Okay, Richie, it's your, after about 5 minutes of this, Joe's getting further along, and so are we. And so we decided, thanks a lot, Joe, that really helps. And we left the room. And about a month later, my phone rings when I was living in LA, and it's Joe. And Joe says, we're working on our next record, our new record, and we'd really love to have some pedal steel guitar on this one song. And it was my chance. I said, really, Joe? Hey, why don't I come down? I'll show you 20 minutes. I can show you how to play pedal steel just like me. Come on. So I ended up playing on their thing, but I got the chance to lay him down on that one. which was one of my fond memories of the road.
That's great. Did you do a lot of session work outside of Poco?
A lot of session work.
Yeah.
I played on everyone's, from Three Dog Night, their hits, to Gladys Knight, from Joan Baez to Joe Walsh, and everything in between. I played music sessions sitting next to Glenn Campbell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I did so many sessions I can't even remember, in Europe, in New York, and a lot in LA. I was the session steel player in LA for a number of years.
What do you prefer? Do you prefer being in the studio or playing live, if you had a choice?
Oh, I'm playing live. I don't do studio anymore. I quit in the 80s because I don't like the atmosphere. I played in the A team in LA, and I played in the A team in Nashville when I first moved there in '85. And it was a horrible experience, because the whole idea, especially in country music, which had such low budgets and they were so conscious of the money and this kind of stuff, I'd be in a session with all great players, and they'd play the song, on the demo on the speakers or your earphones, and you'd listen to it, and you'd have a little chart, you'd put it down, and then you'd play it. And the idea, probably to this day, is that you didn't want to make a mistake, because they didn't want to do 2 takes or 3, heaven forbid. Yeah. So if you made a mistake, at the end they'd say, okay, how was everybody? Anybody need another chance? And if you raised your hand, it was like they could throw darts at you, Yeah. So, and it was, all of a sudden it became obvious to me about country music and the recordings. They all sound alike, and there's a reason. It's because everybody played safe. I was used to using the studio as a tool where you could experiment and try this and try that and go different directions, and it was a real learning, and not learning, but it was a great place to experiment. Yeah. Not doing sessions. I had to play, and producers usually didn't know anything about steel guitar, especially, and they were all looking for that whack, 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 same thing. If you did that, they were thrilled. Yeah. But if you tried to do anything that was any bit out of the norm, no. And you definitely didn't want to. So I played real safe all the time, and I just hated it. Yeah. And I finally said, I'm just not going to do this. It's changed now. Like my favorite steel player is Dan Dugmore. I don't know if you know who Danny is.
Yeah, I know who that is. Yeah, for sure.
Stuff he's done, it's so much like I would do if I were as good as he is. He's using he's doing a lot of the things I did back in the 70s, all the fuzz tones and the octave dividers and the Leslies and that, and playing parts that aren't traditional steel guitar parts. Yeah. And so there's room for that. Sturgill Simpson, he's got some great stuff on Sturgill's record. And so there's more experimentation. But the only problem is there's no steel guitars on any country records anymore. Yeah. But other than that, it's wide open.
Well, maybe that will come back, and maybe this time that, everyone's spending so much time at home, in their home studios and stuff, right? Maybe there's more experimenting going on.
Yeah. Let's hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's hope.
Yeah, there certainly isn't much steel at all on country.
What kills me too is that when Paul and I went to Nashville in '85, and we sat down. We were signed to MCA, and we were at a desk with this guy Jimmy Bowen, who was like the king of Nashville at the time. He was running MCA, although he wasn't the president. We sat down, and he said, "Okay, you guys," and he said, "All right, those really loud, great guitar parts that you're playing?" And he looked at Paul. He said, "You can't have those in country music." And he said, the 2-singer thing, you got to figure out who's going to be the singer, because country audience can't understand 2 singers. And he went through this list of things, those drums that you have on your records, they're going to be pushed way back. You can't have drums like that on a country record. And he says, we only sell 4 or 5 gold records a year in country music. And I'll never forget when he said this. He said, if we do the records the way you want to do them, we put them out, everybody will love them, but there's going to be this one little old lady sitting around the radio who's going to, it's not Ernest Tubb. She's going to call the station, and they're going to end up jerking the record. And so, we have to be real careful, because we don't sell a lot of records. And I'm thinking, I guess I figured out why you don't sell a lot of records. You're making records for one little old lady in Omaha, Nebraska. You only have 4. So we ended up getting away from that label and that guy, thank God. But it just, irks me every time I hear or watch on TV and hear country music, which is heavy metal now. The drums and it's totally heavy metal, but with a hillbilly singer and virtually the same melody to every song.
Yeah, that wraps it up.
and now they sell millions and millions of records. I'd like to see Jimmy Bowen again. He's retired to Hawaii and he's laying on the beach there with the money he made out of country music.
Yeah, I know. So what it's like now for you touring and getting out there on the road and the shows you're doing now? How much does it differ from when you used to tour in the 70s and 80s and that time period? Do you like it? Obviously, so much more technical involved now, but it's just fun getting out and playing the songs and doing those things, or did you prefer it back in the day better?
No, I mean, the pressure's off now. There's no pressure to have a hit record because, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's basically we get a chance to go see our fans and our friends. We have a lot of friends around the country who have come to Poco shows for 50 years. And we've all grown up and grown old together. And it's really enjoyable to see them. And we sell out virtually everywhere we play. And we play some packages with Pure Prairie League. And I think our first one coming up is with Orleans. No, it's Amazing Rhythm Aces. And Firefall. We have great shows with them. And, I've known Jock forever.
Yeah.
Jock Bartley. And so it's a lot of fun because we get to see friends, musician friends, and we get to see audience friends who come to see us every time. The only bad part is traveling these days is so difficult. You go to the airport, you get in line, take off your shoes and strip down, and you get through that line, and then you got to stand in line to get on the airplane, and then you get off the airplane, you got to stand in line, and you got to stand in line to get your bags, and then you stand in line to get your rent-a-car, and then you go to the hotel and stand in line to get your hotel room, and it really literally takes 12 hours for me to get from the cabin here to wherever the show is. 12 hours of traveling. So, every show is a 3-day experience because you have the day before and the day after and then the day of the show. And it's pretty hectic. It's pretty tiresome doing that. If we were touring like Eric Clapton or the Eagles, the only time I've ever been mad at Timothy B. Schmidt and this wasn't too long ago. He was talking about the Eagles and all that. And he said, I really appreciate it because I can't imagine getting on a commercial airplane again. Going for the throat, Every time I'm in line at Southwest, I think of Timothy and bless his heart.
Yeah.
And so that's the part I don't like. That's the part. I remember in the 70s, our roadies used to roll up to the airplane on the concourse in our vans and load the gear off onto the airplane.
Wow.
Yeah. Things have changed.
Yeah, and they're probably going to change again, after all this. Who knows, after we're kind of vaccinated and stuff, it's going to be that much longer yet getting on planes. And
I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope that we can get on planes by June because where were we playing? We're playing in Florida, I think. Anyway, that's a long drive from here. Yeah,
I hope so too. So any plans for Poco to do any more recording in the near future?
I don't think so because one, where's the market? All the records that bands like us are doing James Taylor isn't selling records.
Yeah.
There's just the audience is a different audience now. They've grown up, and I don't think people my age spend much time on Spotify. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't see a big. They call them vanity projects, as you know now, and I'm a little past vanity. I'm still writing. I have a solo record deal with a label called Blue Alon that I really love. I love those people, and I'm really happy with the solo record I put out. It's called Waiting on the Sun. And so if anything, I would do, and I'd probably do it with the Poco guys, a couple of songs, because everyone's releasing just a couple of songs these days, a single or an EP at the most. I might do that, but I don't know. I'm kind of, this whole thing knocked the wind out of me as far as looking towards that kind of a future.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And what about producing? Do you like wearing a producing hat a lot, or that wasn't your thing? No. We produced Poco records for 30 years. Even when we had a producer listed, a lot of times they weren't there. So I have a lot of experience doing that, but it's not something I enjoy. Yeah.
I like playing live. I think that's really great. I really enjoy that. And like I say, at my age, it's that, cooking, and fishing. So
that's perfect. Not necessarily in that order.
Not necessarily in that.
So we'll wrap up in a couple more questions. I really appreciate your time. It's been some great stories. Okay. And I know you've mentioned one question I like to ask everybody. You mentioned all these great places you've played over the years. Is there anywhere out there, whether it's a venue or a country or any place that you haven't played that you've always wanted to? I
would love to play Telluride in Colorado.
Yeah.
Because I'm a Colorado boy.
Yeah.
And we played all over Colorado, but never played Telluride. We've tried and been turned down a number of times, and so just quit trying. But that's on my bucket list.
Yeah, that would be a good one for sure. And last question, and this one I like to throw out to the musicians. If you had to leave the house there, you've got a lot of guitars behind you and instruments. If you had to hypothetically leave the house quickly and only could take one instrument with you, which one would it be?
It might be this one. Can you see that one?
Yeah, I can see.
That's a Gruen guitar that Jimmy Messina bought 6 of them, I think, when we were doing our reunion record in the late 80s. And he gave one to Randy Meisner, gave one to me, and he kept the rest, that rascal. And so anyway, they're really rare guitars and very expensive guitars. And this one here has the signature of every major member of Poco.
Oh, wow.
Has Timothy B. Schmidt on there. He's right there by the bridge.
Yeah.
Me, Paul Cotton, Jimmy Messina, George Grantham, Randy Meisner, which was a hard one to get, Richie Furay. So all the big 8 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Jack Sundred, you can see there. That's probably I have 2. The Martin on the other wall is the other one. I'd have to have one in each hand. That's the first acoustic guitar I ever bought when I went to LA. And, we're sitting in Richie's little cottage he had in Laurel Canyon, and like Neil would come by, and he was just getting ready to record his first record, which, by the way, has George Grantham playing drums and Jimmy Messina playing bass.
Oh, wow.
He didn't give him credit on the record, which really broke the guy's hearts, but it's George on Down by the River.
Oh.
So anyway, they all had these Martins, these great Martins, and I really hadn't had history with acoustic guitars. And so I went out and I bought that one in 1968. It's a 68 Martin. Is it a D35 or S35? I forget. Yeah. So those 2 guitars, and I played that on every Poco record that has acoustic guitar, has that one on it. So those 2, I've thought about this. If there was something, I would grab those 2 guys and head out the door. I might have to, I'd grab that steel guitar, but it's too heavy.
Yeah. No. If you had a couple extra minutes, you come back and grab that.
I'd make Mary carry that.
Perfect. And cooking, we'll wrap up in that.
Okay.
What do you like cooking wise? Are you you a good chef, or you talk about that? Talk about your cooking likes.
Well, no, I can cook pretty well. I spend a lot of time watching YouTubes and then redo. Oh, that's the house phone.
Yeah.
Get that, Mary. She's got it. But I do like a mussel, which is not a real Missouri dish. Mussels in a curry vert blanc, and some outside the stuff. Salmon wrapped in phyllo dough and spices. Yeah. And for Thanksgiving and Christmas, there's always the what's that liqueur? Grand Marnier.
Grand Marnier, yeah.
I make my Grand Marnier turkey. So I have, I've got a few things that I call on that work out really good.
Well, it's funny because now you get to a point where touring is great, doing the show is great, but where you eat while you're on tour, it's just as important as the gig itself.
You nailed it. You nailed it. That's probably the biggest thing I miss about being on the road is all these great restaurants. In every city we have restaurants that we like to go to. And I'm a big sushi person, and my favorite sushi restaurants in each place are Cajun, like, in Dallas there, which I probably couldn't think of the name of that either. But yeah, I miss those restaurants big time. Where we live, it's a Missouri Hicks. It's a big restaurant, and it's all the barbecue you can stand.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. That's the part I miss about touring is I know every city where their spot I'm going to go eat. That you plan everything around that.
Isn't that, see, that's a sign of the times. I noticed that about 20 years ago. Used to be we'd have these little black books, as you know, and it'd be, remember Janine in South Dakota, and you remember, and we'd have phone numbers and names on it.
Yeah.
And now it's restaurants. Dan, you remember that Papa Do's there in Dallas? It's how life has changed.
I know. And I think all the time they have all these television shows with all on the Food Network and all these so popular. And they should be hosted by musicians because they know the best places to eat by far.
You're right.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. Step aside, Guy Fieri.
Yes, that's right. Well, thank you very much for spending the time on the podcast. It was fascinating chatting with you, and I'm a big fan. And
I warned you. I've been locked up so long. I just saw these. Can't stop talking.
Oh, it's great. I'm still laughing about the Vince Gill story. It was great.
Oh, it was hilarious. But he troopered through it. He's a pro.
Yeah. Oh, he's great. Well, thanks again, and I really appreciate the time, and hopefully we'll get back to touring, and if you're in this area, I'd love to come and come see you.
Sounds good to me. I'll see you then.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you.